I think easily two of the biggest issues in the next Canadian federal election are going to be the issues of housing affordability as well as immigration. I think at this point, everyone understands that these two issues are effectively inextricably linked together. Right now, Canada has extremely restricted housing supply because of all the restrictions, high costs, and timelines in order to actually build new houses and apartments. At the same time, we have very, very high immigration rates. About 500,000 people are entering the country every year under the Trudeau Liberals to become permanent residents and someday citizens. At the same time that we have another 500,000 students entering the country every year who require temporary housing while they're attending university. This is a recipe for disaster, and I actually think Justin Trudeau's Liberals are incentivized to keep this disastrous situation going on. Just like a lot of the Social Security policy that the Trudeau Liberals are pushing, the Liberals actually don't have an incentive to solve this problem because they think that they get more votes through just keeping it as a problem and then basically bribing Canadian permanent residents and citizens with their own taxpayer dollars in order to pretend that they're solving the problem by giving you little bits and pieces of money to sort of keep you in your house. I don't think this is going to be enough because it's just going to fuel more inflation and housing prices are just going to keep skyrocketing. So it's just effectively a circular problem that every time you give people money to pay for housing, the amount of money in the housing market goes up, which means that prices are going to go up because the actual housing supply is not increasing to meet the demand, and all that's being added is just more overheated demand through more money, allowing more people to bid on houses. It's just a terrible situation, and Justin Trudeau is exploiting it to try and gain voters. I think that the federal conservatives need to be very savvy on this issue and make sure that they don't start backing the same dumb policies that the liberals are. It's not the federal government's or the provincial government's duty to give citizens money so that they can buy houses. It's the federal, provincial, and local government's duty to pass policies to make it more affordable to build houses. So, on the federal level, if we cut the carbon tax, we cut corporate and personal taxes, developers would have way more money in their pockets to actually build buildings. Same on the provincial level. But on the provincial and local government level, what also needs to happen is that they have to stop restricting the land that houses can be built on, and they also need to stop the process from being so long. Right now, in cities across Canada, it takes sometimes more than a year to gain approvals to actually start building a house. And the amount of inspections and other sorts of taxes and regulations that developers have to follow make it an incredibly grueling and expensive task to actually undertake. As much as people want to demonize developers because of all the money they make on high housing costs, all they're doing is trying to maximize the amount of money that they're getting on the small housing supply that they're allowed to sell. If you made it far easier to build in this country, far more developers would just build more houses and sell them at a lower cost. This is what happens with supply and demand, that when you lower supply, people are going to sell that supply for higher costs. It's not the developer's fault that this is happening. Just like when the NDP and the Liberals complain at grocery stores from raising their prices, well, when you raise taxes and it makes it hard and it makes stock more expensive to bring in for grocery stores, they're also going to raise the price of that stock, that more restricted stock. But one of the things that some conservative politicians are falling into the trap of is going along with municipal governments like Calgary City Hall, trying to push affordability plans that are effectively just liberal plans in disguise with a nice sounding name on it. Right now, the city of Calgary is pushing this incredibly stupid task force recommendation report on affordable housing, which is effectively just rent control in disguise. They throw a few kernels of decent public policy in there, like trying to speed up approvals for new buildings and trying to repurpose some public land for housing development. But at the same time, they've slipped in there rent control. Effectively, all 15% of all new developments in each ward of the city must be offered at below market values. I think this is both for just the house's price as well as renting that unit. This is going to make developers run away from Calgary. It's one of those ridiculous policies where on its face it doesn't make any sense, because all the places in Canada that have incredibly high housing prices like Vancouver and Toronto also have these same affordability measures. They've had them for a while, and their housing keeps going up in price, because while there's a few lucky people who get rent controlled units, it just basically disincentivizes developers from building houses in the city, and landlords do not want to offer up their properties for rent because it's not worth it anymore. It's becoming an issue in Calgary where people are effectively pretending that simply like that the government just mandating that housing be affordable is how housing becomes affordable. Again, in every jurisdiction, especially places like New York City and LA, where they try and implement rent control, all that happens is 15% of lucky individuals get rent controlled units, and then everyone else has to pay luxury prices to make up for the fact that they aren't living in a rent controlled apartment or house. This is what's going to happen in Calgary if this recommendation report this week is actually approved. I'm very happy that people like Councillor Dan McLean and other councillors have actually been pushing back on this, as well as federal MPs like Greg McLean and other MPs in the city, making sure that they know that this is not that like citizens know that this is not actually a plan to make housing more affordable. It's a plan that gives the government more power over the housing market. I actually did a recent interview with Dan McLean a few weeks ago on the housing issue, and we both agreed when I was interviewing him that it's completely ridiculous that the city of Calgary is trying to throw in all these complex measures to try and artificially make housing cheaper in Calgary. At the same time, they've never thought of lowering property taxes in the city that would actually make Calgarians have more money in their pockets to be able to afford housing. But government officials never like to pretend that any problem is government caused, and they like to pretend that every issue has a government solution embedded in it. I think, and we even have politicians that are supposedly conservatives like Leela A here, the former MLA, actually endorsing this plan, as well as other MPs like the housing critic for the Conservative Party, Scott Aitchison. I think some of these people like Aitchison, Michelle Rempel, and Leela A here are just reading the top line of the affordability plan, seeing that it says it's affordability plan, they're going to try and increase developments, and just assuming that that's what the report does. As soon as rent control entered the conversation in this report, it became nonsense. And the federal Conservative Party has to be very careful at which policies they endorse in order to fix the housing problem. Right now, what would be very good is actually increasing the supply of housing by reducing taxes and regulations on builders so that we can actually increase the supply. And I think on the issue of immigration, the Conservative Party should investigate whether or not we should put in place restrictions on immigration to lower the number maybe from 500,000 to 300,000, or at least have a financial stress test for immigrants so that we're not bringing immigrants into the country for them to basically become serfs forced to rent for the rest of their lives because mortgage payments are too high in Canada. It's not good for Canadians, and it's not good for Canadian immigrants that nobody can afford a house. It's not compassionate to bring people into the country of Canada just for them to effectively be having to take minimum wage jobs to barely afford rent for the rest of their lives. That's actually a very cruel thing to do, and it seems to be Justin Trudeau's plan to make more people dependent on the government. In places like the city of Calgary, what we need is less restrictions on building. We need sped up development times, which this recommendation report does purportedly aim at doing, but we shouldn't be trying to mandate that prices be cheaper through such measures as rent control. Developers are just going to flee the city and go to Fort McMurray and Lethbridge and other places that's cheaper to build and flee cities like Calgary, Vancouver, and Toronto like they already are doing. Anyways, hopefully this wasn't too boring today. I know that the issue of housing policy is usually not the most spicy, but hopefully you liked this. Anyways, I also have in the description of this video my usual Give, Send, Go legal fund if you want to contribute to that, as well as the TNT email link. Sign up there so you can get the National Telegraph's emails sent directly to your inbox with our new videos, as well as articles that we try and write every day or every week, depending on if it's the medium of writing or video. Other than that, have a great day, everyone.